Right, we are back later than normal because we've had hurricanes, we've had all sorts of things going on, but I am back for a bit later than normal coffee chat with Brice from Esoteric Atlanta. How you doing, Brice?
I'm still here. We didn't float away. We didn't somebody was laughing because the wind was 100 miles per hour, which I don't know what that is with kilometers. But that's some aggressive wind. And someone was saying we should tie a pillowcase around Robbie's neck so when we took him outside to go to the bathroom, he could just fly like
Yeah,
Superman. So yeah, but we're still here. We're still everything's, tis the season of this type of shenanigans happening. So yeah, it was kind of nice, I was saying, to have a couple of days where you really couldn't do anything because there was
yeah.
a hurricane. So
And that's the difference. And we're going to be talking today. This all ties in with energy because we're going to be talking about energy vampires, narcissists, about where we give our energy away in general. And, when you have those forced breaks, it really allows you to sort of recharge your batteries, doesn't it? And take stock of where you're at and where you are giving your energy away to.
yeah.
So, energy vampires. What does it mean to you, and what are some of the real sort of warning signs? Because it's quite a new term for a lot of people, really.
I think for me, I think we've all had those people in our lives that just drain us. Like every time we're around them, I think most people are aware of their own boundaries of like when they're taking up too much time, being respectful of somebody else. But they're just certain people, and it usually is I would say people who have not necessarily narcissists, but maybe have some narcissistic traits. Because from what I think they're doing on a psychological and spiritual level is they don't have a sense of self. And so they
Yeah,
have to pull from other people's sense of self, and I think that's what people are feeling is their energy being depleted in order to give somebody else your own like life force, if that makes sense. But I definitely I think I don't think energy vampires are anything of like superstition. I think they're literally people who just don't know their own boundaries. And we've all had them.
completely. And it leaves you, I think, when you've, one of the big warning signs for me about when you know if someone's an energy vampire is you feel really emotionally and physically drained after the interaction. And it's something that I do quite a lot is sort of sit there and sort of think about how do I feel after certain interactions and looking for those warning signs because a lot of energy vampires, I mean, there's quite a few traits that go with it, but one of it is a constant need for attention, people that really dominate the conversations and make everything about themselves. And I'd love your thoughts, Brice, in terms of how this can also tie into information that we're listening to, content that we're consuming, and how it can be used in that situation. Wow. Oh, that's
Hold
right.
on. Speaking of, hold on 1 second. Let all right, go see daddy. Robbie obviously has a lot to say about energy.
And he's got a lovely dark manly bark. My girls
Yes,
love that.
I
Yeah.
know. He's a
Yeah.
baritone. No, my boyfriend just came. We've got us another strike coming with the ports here on the East Coast. So people are he had to go to the grocery store and load up on some. So anyway, that's a different story for a different day. But yeah, it's the same. It's like when you do have that with people, like you were saying, where you're around someone and you kind of feel like you don't have. It is a different kind. Like there's a difference between being at work all day and coming home just tired,
Mm.
but it's like you've lost that just it's an exhaustion when you're around somebody that just is constantly needy, constantly pulling. And again, you before we started recording, you had talked about with social media and where we allow like social media or the news or television to like we kind of put ourselves in those positions to have that pulled from us. And a couple of days ago, there was this like TikTok challenge that I noticed that I was like, God, I wish I could do this. This sounds absolutely amazing. And the challenge was to go somewhere for 63 days. I don't know why it was 63. Maybe there's some scientific like breaking of habits from that. I don't know. But to go isolate yourself if you can for 63 days, like if you can get like a house in the mountains or something, and don't bring your cell phone. So you don't have a cell phone. You can have a landline there if you need an emergency. You don't necessarily have to not have entertainment. You can have a TV, but like old school TV where we watch a program or you put a VHS or a DVD in. And the deal was for 63 days, you commit to going to bed before 10 p.m. and getting up at 5 a.m. You do 1 hour of exercise every day, and you commit at least an hour a day to learning something new. And again, you're limited to, you don't have social media, you have old school communication devices, old school TV. So what's going to happen over those 63 days? And I thought, oh my God, I would love to do something like that, because maybe it's nostalgia. I was telling you, over the hurricane, we were watching the old Twin Peaks from the 1990s, Who Killed Laura Palmer, and we're watching this, crazy, wacky TV series. And I was looking at the decor from like the early 90s. And I said to my boyfriend, I was like, this actually makes me miss the 90s, like miss
Yeah.
being a kid in the 90s, even though the decor is totally tacky to us now. There was a comfort there. And I was like, there's these, they're having to find telephones, and they're going out in their bicycles and their cars, and there's not much of a we're not enslaved to devices.
Oh,
And
yeah.
and I know everybody's nostalgic about their own childhood. I get that, but I feel like we were the last, I mean, we were like the last generation to experience the world without being tied to technology. And I think too, Catherine, I would like to hear your thoughts on this as well. When we were kids and we did not have cell phones, we only had landlines. Our communication with our friends was limited. Like, I remembered that when I was a kid, it was considered impolite to call somebody after 9 p.m. at night. Like, you didn't
Yeah.
call your friends after 9 p.m. We even had the busy signal before they had call waiting. So if you were trying to call your friend, so our interaction with our friends was limited. But now that we have cell phones and you can text people all the time, there's almost like an expectancy of people to get your attention at all times. And if you can't respond right away, sometimes people get upset about that. So
Completely. I mean, I see this so much, and it's like one of the things about energy vampires is boundary pushing, where um, uh, people ignore your boundaries and more of your time, energy, and resources. And I see this so much on social media, and also on things like WhatsApp and some of the apps that you can get the instant communication. I think that's such an important point, because we see it the whole time. We sometimes get called it. I think anyone who's got a social media account will get it, where people sort of say, well, if you're on a public platform, you're asking for it, but you're not. Just because you're on a public platform doesn't mean you're asking for all rules of respectability, courtesy, and common decency to be ignored. Completely the opposite. And this whole thing about where take something like an Instagram. So I put a lot of effort into my Instagram, and Instagram is very short form. It's completely different to the long form we do here. And so these discussions are much more in depth. So we can go a lot deeper and really go into a subject properly. But on the short form, whether it's TikTok or Instagram, you can't go into detail. It's snippets, it's bite sizes. And to me, I see that as thought provoking,
yeah, yeah.
not to provide the whole solution to a lifelong of problems. And it's amazing how much I would see people using sort of energy vampire techniques on social media, where they want more, 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 more. And that's not what that platform's for. You can't give a complex solution in a quick little soundbite. So I do think this technology has made this behavior almost more obvious, but actually a little bit more dangerous, because people can hide behind the anonymity of social media and being online.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, again, think about like when we were kids and you had a landline in your house that rang really loud, right?
Yeah.
So you knew that you didn't call past 9 p.m. at night because your friend's mama was going to be upset and they were going to tell your mama, and there was more of accountability for your
Mm.
actions when it was your actions, like when it was out, people knew who you were, they knew it was you calling. And so there was a respect for boundaries within families, within homes, that there was family time. I
Yeah.
know that people's jobs, of course, like depending on the job, like my dad was on call because he was a veterinarian, so there were times when the he would get called into work, right? A lot of doctors are on call, firemen, policemen, so I get that's part of your job. But for a lot of people who work in corporate America, before the invention of social media, or specifically cell phones, when they left work, they left work.
Yeah.
And so now even corporations are expecting people to be contactable when they're with their family at home. And so this common human decency of giving people their space has completely gone out the window. And I think that's a huge problem. I am grateful to be my age though, because I do feel like with my friends, we're not as needy on social media as other generations are, because we did come from a place where there was, you might not get a response right away because the person was busy, and you respected that, if that makes sense. We have left messages on people's answering machines, so yeah, I think the invention of social media has turned people who are that entitled. It's become it's almost come I hate to use the word a pandemic, but it's kind of become this like issue now, where there's so many more energy vampires out there with the ability to reach you where there wasn't before.
Oh, yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I was looking into it, making some notes on some of the characteristics, and we can see how the whole online lifestyle that most of us live quite a lot now, it really adds to it. So this constant need for attention, frequent complaining. I mean, you generally see on social media posts far more complaining side of things. We've spoken about that a lot than you do in terms of giving back, in terms of a fair energy exchange, and a lot of emotional manipulation as well. Guilt tripping, use emotional blackmail to get you what you want. And we see this so much in terms of, if you're having a conversation and people don't agree with your opinion, instead of it just being a normal conversation and you're then on to the next thing, it's like homing in on that little point, that one bit in the whole thing that they don't agree with. We see this a lot with people in the public eye, and very much the sort of one-sided relationship, because with social media, I think it really encourages people a lot for their relationship to be very unbalanced. And often, people are wanting to take more than they're giving back. You and I have spoken about this one-sided relationship and sense of entitlement, where people think they're entitled to your attention, your energy, whatever it is, without giving anything back. Whilst when you're meeting people face to face, it's much harder in general to get away with that sort of behavior.
Absolutely. Well, I think some energy vampires are also cowards. I mean, I think about it too, Catherine. Like, we've talked about this a lot at nauseum, but like the people that get mad at us for taking sponsorships or
Mm,
for doing things to better ourselves financially with the work we do. It's almost like they expect us to freely give our energy without anything coming back in return.
yeah,
And they manipulate that, like, oh, you're a sellout, or you're this, or you're that, when literally we have bills to pay. And that's the
exactly.
manipulation. Like, I know, even like trying to get emails from people for our services offline, which that makes us sound like we're streetwalkers. No,
Yeah,
with our
I always think that, yeah.
now there's going to be conspiracies about us. No, with your biology, we'll say your biology business, your and my shala business, like, where people expect us to help them without, this is our business though. Like, what we do
Yeah,
offline is also our business. And when you walk into a business, when you walk into a shala, or you walk into a healing center, you're aware that it's a business. There is
yeah.
an understanding that there is an energy exchange, that doesn't make the work less holy because you're paying for it. It just actually makes it more holy because there's an equal give and take. You have to fill the tank back up. You can't drive your car on empty. And so I think that's also an area where we see a lot of energy vampirism, because people expect people like us on these public platforms to just give of ourselves constantly without replenishing that energy.
Oh, so such good point. I think this is the thing. Everything is more difficult when you haven't got that human to human interaction. And then making it more difficult. And then you've got the whole bots and the AI side of things, complicating it. And a lot of energy vampires, unlike sort of perhaps narcissists, is they may not have malicious intent. Um, they're often seeking that support and validation, but often in a self-centered and demanding way. And again, it's much more difficult to call people up on that behavior where you haven't got that personal interaction. And therefore, we know one of the traits of human behavior is almost the more you get away with something, the
Yeah.
more it becomes embedded as the norm and the more entitled you get. So I think it is getting more and more difficult for people to pull this up, and more difficult often for people to recognize it in themselves. And I think when we're looking and criticizing some of the leaders of our countries and the politicians and the celebrities and everything, it's really good to sort of take a look and almost, we used to say, put the shoe on the other foot and look at it from another perspective and sort of saying, well, how much do we feel that as individuals we are giving a fair exchange of our energy? How much are we giving constructive help, constructive, or is it all negative criticism? Is it all taking and draining, or are we giving back?
Yeah, it's so interesting as you're saying that too, because I literally just the other day, because of my algorithms, I'll get little TikToks or videos from psychologists that talk about human behavior. And I stumbled upon this one psychiatrist that talked a lot about in our early childhood, the children who are hugged a lot and whose parents really work on keeping the environment safe, that they grow up to be the very emotionally mature adults. And I thought how, and as you're saying this, I'm remembering back to that conversation the psychiatrist was having, because basically what he was saying is that at this young stage of life, you're provided support, you learn support, and so you then learn how to support yourself emotionally. Now that doesn't mean that if you didn't get that as a kid you can't course correct it now, but I think that would be an interesting for our audience to, like, hear. I want to hear y'all's feedback, like, for us to be able to find a sense of self, even if we don't realize that we're doing that to other people, if we want to have a honest conversation with ourselves about what we are, how we are perceived by other people, then maybe go back and look at patterns in your life, and how can you fill yourself up without taking from somebody else. Does that make sense? Like, how do you sit
Yeah.
with yourself and in yourself? How can you rest? My boyfriend says that a lot. Do you have the ability to rest within yourself without having stimulation from anybody else? And we know that people, again, who are narcissists typically don't have a sense of self. But that's saying, again, even the Cassiopeans say some people might have narcissistic traits, but they're not a narcissist. They're just a distressed souled person. They have a
Yeah.
soul. And so, in part, of course, correcting that, of course, comes from yourself. So, if you find yourself trying to take the attention from somebody else because you feel like you need it, then what is it within you that's lacking? Does that make sense? That you feel like that?
Yeah. And
Right.
I think these are such important things, because when we recognize this, it's so important not to beat ourselves up about it, because it's always coming from a wounded place. So I've just realized, I don't know what I look like to you, but the sun keeps going in and out. So I look orange
Oh,
to
there's going to be conspiracies now,
I
Catherine.
do. Right, I'm obviously joining Trump's team with orange man bag. I haven't got fake tan on. It's just really weird. The lighting keeps coming and going. So hey ho. But that's a complete distraction talking about myself. But
Robert Kennedy got to her, guys. He contacted her and was like, join our team. What you got to do is one thing, you gotta paint yourself orange.
yeah, absolutely. So I think with this, when we recognize it and we see ourselves doing those behavior patterns, it's not about beating yourself up and telling yourself you're wrong. It's about noticing it and asking yourself why, like the shadow work challenges that we're always talking about, because we can always keep learning. And as the way that we interact with each other changes, it does take time to learn these new skills and
Yeah.
to interact in different ways. It's very difficult for us on a platform like this. We love our communities, and when we're having these conversations, we're sort of imagining you all here with us, literally
Yeah.
over a cup of coffee. But of course, we're not getting that feedback. And normally, if you're speaking in a group, even I used to do loads of talks and presentations and trainings in person. And it's so great when you're doing it in person, because you can read the room and see what's hitting and what's not and course correct. Whilst when we're doing it on video like this, we can't. And so quite often it's more difficult to get that feedback and learn the hard way. And I think with a lot of the shaming and the culture that's going on now, it's so easy to do that and criticize without thinking, what is my input on this? How can I say this in a more constructive way? How can I contribute to this conversation more? And we're not just with the energy vampires, we're not just talking about online, but it's really become apparent to me that that's accentuated the situation and really escalated it and made it far, far more prominent than it used to be when we had to have these one-on-one interactions, because the boundaries just aren't there for a lot of people now. I was listening to a really good healer this morning, Brice, really, really good guy that's coming on my show. And he's got a daughter, a young daughter, and he was saying it's a very similar conversation to the ones you and I have had a lot, actually, that it's so fascinating to see how entitled a lot of people have come to sort of pick up on one thing someone's saying and really throw it back. Like he had a picture taken of him with someone very famous, and he got so much kickback because it was a political figure, and half the people are going to want you that and half aren't, and then they start making it really personal, and it's like, wow, what, no one would go, no one that wasn't a psychopath or a real narcissist would go into someone's home
Yeah.
and start behaving like that. Or if they were, they probably wouldn't get away with it very long. And yet, this behavior is becoming so extreme now. And no wonder the poor younger generations that have grown up with this as the norm are struggling with this communication, because they're just not getting the feedback in a timely manner so that they can see how their behavior is coming across and choose whether they want to course correct or not.
And it's weird. It's almost like with this entitlement, and people jump to crazy conclusions now that I don't remember before social media people jumping to crazy.
No.
It used to be that you could see a famous person, a politician or an actor, and take a picture with them just because they're famous, and no one would have questioned why you took that picture. They're famous, right?
Yeah.
Like if you're a Republican and you saw a famous Democrat politician, you'd probably take a picture because it's a famous person, and no one would have questioned that. But now it's everything is so scrutinized, and I think it's all a projection. Well, and I also think when you do have a social media platform, what tends to happen, they call it a parasocial relationship,
Mm.
where, and I think what happens is a lot of people project their own ideas of who you are onto you because they don't know you in person,
Yeah.
you know, and you do something that counters their belief of who you are, it becomes an insult to them, which it shouldn't be because that's not who you are. And speaking about that guy too, there's a video I did the other day where I talked about a lot about the Southern culture and how much like voodoo is down
Oh,
here and
I
like.
saw that. I was going to bring that up. Brilliant.
Well, there was a comment somebody makes. We're talking specifically about the Gypsy Rose Blanchard situation, and she's from New Orleans for those who don't understand. And I was trying to giving a perspective of something that came up from a Southerner's perspective, where people outside the South kind of blew it up, but people in the South are like, "This is normal in the South." Anyway, somebody left a comment of like basically chastising me because there's also voodoo and or magic in Brazil, and
Yeah.
I responded and I was like, "But nothing in the video. Gypsy Rose is not from Brazil. I'm not from Brazil. Just because we're talking about the magic and the voodoo in a certain location in the world does not mean that we're negating that this doesn't happen in other areas of the world. It just pertains to the subject of the video." And I, for the life of me, could not figure out why this person was so offended that I didn't talk about magic in Brazil when the video was about New Orleans and Gypsy Rose Blanchard. For the life of me, I was trying to figure out where the two wires weren't connected, because why the hell would I bring up something into a video that has nothing to do with the actual video? And I started thinking about it. I'm like, is it a lack of education nowadays? Are kids not taught that when you creatively write, even you don't pull in information that's not pertinent to the story? You don't create characters in a story that aren't pertinent to the main crux of the story? Or is this literally just this severe case of entitlement where everything revolves around everyone, and if you don't highlight something that mirrors them in the story, then they become offended even though the story's not about them? Does that make sense? Like, I was so confused by this
Yeah.
comment.
It makes so much sense. And I was going to bring up the Gypsy Rose Blanchard as well, because your videos on that go into this and really set some points in it really well. And I think also in terms of this drawing energy, you as an empath, we always look in and say, right, okay, if you're attracting a lot of narcissists or energy vampires into your life, why? And again, we've spoken about this loads of times. So go back to our coffee chats, because we have a lot of interesting discussions. And we are, as I would say again, we're not pretending we've got all this sorted, because I've got an example I want to tell you about what I did the other day, and I caught myself doing it. I was like, oh, that's interesting. But if you're an empath, there can be there's a fine line. It's like the mirror with energy vampires as well, because quite often empaths are overgiving
Hmm?
with the energy of wanting to get something back, receiving attention or gratitude or whatever back. And we see this a lot with empaths, where it's almost like a cry for attention. So a lot of the you can, if someone called you an energy vampire, I think most of us would be quite insulted. Yet if someone called us an empath, most people would be quite pleased. But actually, when you look up the characteristics and how we play situations,
They're
it's
pretty
the
similar.
same. And I've recognized myself doing that. I am a real empath, and the give. But sometimes it can absolutely be in terms of the energy of like wanting to get recognized for that, or wanting to get some gratitude back, or some thanks back, and things like that. So that these things, it's like we've almost demonized a lot of these labels, because obviously no one wants to be called an energy vampire. But actually, it would be so nice, I suppose, if we could probably relabel some of these things in a better way to make people more open to taking a look and saying, okay, how's this playing out in my life? Am I happy with that or not? And if I'm not, either if I'm being these character traits or if I'm on the receiving end, both of it is showing that there's an imbalance in the way I'm going out and showing up in the world. And I can actually change that if I've got that information and people give me the good feedback. So, one of the things about having great friends is we'll give each other good feedback about things we're noticing. And that's so, so important to know that someone's doing that with your best interest at heart,
Yeah.
because often
Yeah.
you're the last person to see that behavior.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. And I agree. It goes back to, for if you guys go back to childhood, it goes back, the impact and narcissists usually come from the same trauma.
Mm,
And they're reacting it through it. It's like the same, it's like a mirror. It's, yeah, exactly. It's a mirror of each other. And so people who are healthy, so I would say like a healthy minded person wouldn't necessarily be an empath. They would be empathic to people. They would be
yeah,
compassionate to people, but they wouldn't feel the responsibility to make somebody else happy
yeah,
because they're full with themselves as well. I see that as a big difference between my boyfriend and me. He grew up in a much more stable home than I did, even though he lived in many, many places. And he has a way better ability at putting boundaries up and not feeling responsible for other people, not feeling it. But think about it, like if you grow up in a house where you are responsible for your parents' happiness, or you feel that way, and that's how you receive love, as if your parents are calm, then you take that into your adult world, you're looking for that back in return, because that's the pattern that's within you. And it becomes the child is innocent, but the adult has to take accountability. And so that becomes your lot, is to like find where you do that, and to, why is it that you are coddling this person that's so awful to you, or that makes you feel this way? It's because you're looking for that manageable love. But there's other people in your life that also will give you that love without taking that from you. And it's interesting. I was thinking about this too, and it's not bad. I'm going to bring this up with myself, for people that go back and look at their childhoods. Everything we do as an adult is a reflection of some pattern we learned in childhood. That's just kind of how it
yeah.
is. And I look at like I'm the oldest child. I didn't grow up with a great father. My father was, even when my parents were married, was kind of dismissive and not really around. And as an adult, the funny thing about me, I mean, I've gone through therapy for my daddy issues, if you will, but the men that I've always dated in my life have been 10 to 15 years older than me.
Mm,
And I recognize why that is. I recognize that by dating a man that much older than me, I feel that safety that I'm looking for from my father. Now that doesn't mean that I have to stop dating. My boyfriend's 11 years older than me, and we have a great relationship. Like there's something weird about it, but I do feel safer because
mm,
he's financially responsible, he's a protector, and so those elements that I'm lacking, that I didn't have as a child, I find in him. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Like I've recognized this for a while now, that that's why I'm attracted to much older men. But it's not something that's hindering my life, because he is a healthy person. So
yeah,
regardless of the age gap, he is a healthy person mentally. So it's a balanced relationship. There's no narcissism, there's no abuse, there's none of that. So there's none of that going on. So when you go back and look at your life, you can see these patterns from your childhood. It's very simple, and some of them are not bad, they just are what they are. But when you recognize them, like I can now recognize, and I kind of chuckle about it. That's why I've always dated men that much older. Obviously, it's because that's what I'm lacking. So if we look at where we're lacking, if we're lacking affection, if we were lacking that as a child, and we're trying to fulfill that affection by feeling like energy vampires need us, like a narcissist, well, of course they need us. They need our sense of self. But that can also be felt, that love, from somebody who's not an energy
absolutely.
vampire.
That's such a good point. And I see this a lot with the relationship with people and animals. Now, both you and I love our animals to bits. And I think our listeners are real animal lovers. But there's a fine difference between loving them and having that over smothering relationship. So, for example, if you've got a dog, for example, it's in the dog's best interest to feel comfortable being left with other safe adults as
Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
because something might happen to you. Separation anxiety will cause any animal a lot of stress. So sometimes when you're looking at that sort of energy vampire, or not over being over of an empath, you've got to be careful that you're not making others really dependent on you to fulfill that energetic need. So you
Yeah.
can love an animal, but I see it when I'm working with people a lot, because obviously my a main bit of my work I do is with people and their animals. And people would say, you can love your animal to bits, but if you're overly dependent on them, that can be very, very damaging for the animal. The animal
Yeah.
has to be allowed to be themselves. They have to be allowed to display their personality traits. They have to be allowed to feel safe with other people, not just you, because that is going to come up and be a requirement at some stage in their life. So sometimes it's really interesting to look at that. And I lost one of my animals last week, which is one of the reasons we didn't film on Thursday. And it was so interesting to watch my reaction to that, to my husband's reaction. So my husband is much more sort of balanced about that. And my first reaction was, because it was a rescue animal of one of my little guinea pigs, who I had no idea how old she is, because they're all rescue and it's very, very difficult to age a guinea pig. Um, and she died suddenly, which does happen with guinea pigs. And my first reaction was like, oh, could I have done more? Could I have, did I miss something? My husband was just like, well, she would have had a heart attack or stroke. No sense of responsibility. And it's not that one's right or wrong, but these situations, these life situations, can really show you still where your work is and what else you've got to do. So I'm not saying I make my guinea pigs dependent on me, because they're very happy when other people look after them. But equally, by the reaction to that situation, showed me where I still had an over dependency going on in that situation. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, because I was thinking about that too, like, between my boyfriend and me, he's way more balanced when it comes to our dog. He's
Yeah.
way more, he'll tell me, like, our dog sleeps in the bed with us at night, and I know people are gonna have an opinion about that, but it's fine. He sleeps at the bottom of the bed, and when we're just, like, watching TV, I always wanna pull Ravi up to cuddle. Well, Ravi's not really a cuddler. Like, sometimes but that's just kinda not his person. So
Mm,
he goes, like, if you pull me, he goes, "Rrr," like, he doesn't,
mm.
and my boyfriend's always like, Brice, let him have free will choice. He's comfortable at the end of the bed. If he wants your attention, he'll come up and lay with you. Let him have free will choice. Let him. And I'm like, okay, yeah, I am smothering him. I am, and he's better, and I think too, I think that does come back to, like, well, first of all, we are women. I do think women do have
Well, yeah.
a tendency to mother animals. And I do think that, I was reading an article about this, and who knows if it's true or not, but I do think this person said that the animals, are especially dogs, will kind of paint you as mom and dad, and their whatever their dog like they kind of recognize the difference. Like,
Mm.
he knows I'm the good cop. Like, I'm gonna coddle
I
him. I'm
was
gonna
just about to say good cop, bad cop, and
Yeah.
it is really funny. It's the opposite of my thing. As my husband lets the animals get away with murder, and I'm like, actually, there's got to be some safety boundaries. It's that So if you're dealing with a horse, they're very big animals, and there
Mhm.
has to be that sort of boundary so that people don't get hurt, or animals don't
Yeah.
get hurt, sort of thing. But no, they do know. They definitely know, and they can read it so well. It's fascinating to see.
I'm way easier to manipulate than my boy. And that's why I sent you a video. Like, that's another reason why my
Mm,
boyfriend feeds our dog, because he trains him to sit and wait, and like, he cries and makes he starts like for for once he's gonna have this raw meat in his bowl, and we're gonna take it, not him. That's never happened. But he's trained him to wait, and then, okay, like, when it's time, which helps us when we're, like, out in the mountains, because if he doesn't
exactly.
wait, if Ravi's run off too far and he calls wait, Ravi stops, and Todd, we either get close and he goes okay, or says come and he comes back. And so there is a method to this. But I'm such a softie that I would not be able to train that way, because I can't, I don't, so but you know, my boyfriend is better at being like, he, at the end of the day, he's a dog and he needs to
Mm.
be a dog. He's not a human. He needs to be a dog. And and it's interesting to look back again at our childhood though, and how he grew up in a very stable, balanced home, whereas I didn't. And so again, it comes back to that like empathy, like the, what am I looking for from my animal? And you know, I can only guess, but we had lots of animals growing up because my father was a vet, but we had a lot of dogs that got hit by cars, and I still get emotional thinking about those dogs. And sometimes I wonder if I'm projecting that onto my dog now. I don't
Yeah,
know,
I
you
know.
know.
I think all of this is really important for us to look at seeing what we're even the social media stuff, we've all got the power by the way that we react to change things. So it's very easy to redirect a conversation. You know, a few negative comments can redirect it, it can make it really negative. A few positive can course correct and direct it. And I think whether it's, you know, an energy vampire, an empath, or a narcissist, you know, there are some common traits, and but there are some big differences. So but they're all very draining emotionally. I think that's one thing to really notice, because if someone's an overly empathic, it can be really draining as well. And I think we've got to really look at where it's coming from and really look at ourselves as much as looking at everyone else, which is so important, and keep learning, keep changing, keep course correcting. And once we recognize it in ourselves, or once we recognize it in someone else, then we can see areas where, okay, am I drawing that to me? Am I contributing to that situation? Am I not putting strong enough boundaries up? Because this is what I was going to say with your Gypsy Rose videos. You talked a lot about how she was very spoiled as a child. And we all know what happens to spoiled children. They grow up to be real brats. And quite often that's the case with ourselves. You know, if we're displaying personality traits and we're not picked up on them, and it's very difficult for us to be picked up on if we're doing it over social media,
Yeah.
if there's
Oh
not that
yeah.
two-way interaction, then we can develop traits that work that aren't serving us and aren't serving others. So it's that self-reflection is just as important as noticing it in other people, I think.
Oh, absolutely. Having that self-awareness. I was saying that too. I keep thinking, have you ever read the book, The Secret Life of Bees, or seen the movie, The Secret Life of Bees?
No. Oh, yes, I have. Yes, I have. Yes.
The
Quite an
wall.
old one.
Yeah, it was a
Yeah.
book first, and they made it into a movie, and it takes place in South Carolina. And there's one character, this woman, older woman, well, adult, not older, but adult woman, because it's based on a child. It follows a child, and she's very emotional, and she has this wall where she goes whenever she's having like an emotional outburst about something, and she writes down what it is she's sad about, and she puts it in the wall. And I can't, she had a name for this one. I can't, it's been such a long time since I've read the book. Read the book and seen the movie. But it's almost like when we can, and I was thinking about that as you were saying that, about like recognizing, you know, if you are an emotion, like I'm a Scorpio moon. I think you are
Mm,
too, right?
mm.
So we're emotional. Scorpio moons are emotional people. We're overthinkers. We're deep. We have deep emotion, and so things just technically are probably going to hit us harder than somebody like my boyfriend's a Virgo moon, so he's very
Mm.
balanced. You know, and once we can recognize that, I've often thought about that wall in my life. And as you were saying that, I was thinking about it again, like being able to recognize where we have an overstimulation somewhere. And as Kathy O will say, says, almost said her full name, but Kathy, to write it out and to start writing it out. And even though she put it in the wall, like she literally gave it to the wall, gave it to an inanimate object. Being able to just even recognize where, why am I, like, for me it's why am I so much more sensitive to certain things than my boyfriend is,
Yeah.
or than Catherine is, or where is that coming from? Where is that? I have this weird thing with inanimate objects anyway. Like I feel guilty when I throw out something that's not, like, I start to put and I know that's a psychological thing of like putting emotion into, like, whenever there's a toy my dog has that he's basically shredded to pieces and needs to be thrown away, I like feel bad for the object throwing, and it's an inanimate object. It's not even, but I feel bad throwing it. Does that make sense? Like even with
Yeah,
clothes,
completely. I do the same.
I like it's a person, like it's a real thing, and it's not. It's an object. So like, what is that that's projecting that sadness onto this object? And And I think if more people, and I think we just expect, we're at this age, goes back to this entitlement, we expect other people to fulfill us.
Yeah.
And it's not anybody's responsibility. It's not your kid's responsibility. It's not your parents' responsibility. It's not your partner's responsibility. I mean, how many people think if they have this certain relationship, they're going to be fulfilled? This person fills me, completes me. It makes me held. From my experience, the healthiest relationships come from two people who complete themselves.
Yeah.
Where are we doing that in society? Where are people trying to reach towards social media or this or that or another person to complete them, when what if all that's taken away from you anyway? You're going to have to complete yourself. And I think there's a comedian that talks about, I think I told you, he talks about mindfulness and how mindfulness, that term, was not a thing in like the 80s or 90s, because we had no choice but to be mindful, because we didn't have social media to distract us. We had to stand and wait for the bus. We had to stand and wait for the bus. We had to be mindful. You know, like there were times where we had to like rest within ourselves. We didn't have distractions. We were required to rest in ourselves. I remember as a kid I know I've been watching some English comedians talk about like the car trips, the difference between like America and UK, because our country's so big. So like an 8-hour car trip was no big deal to me as a kid, like to go back to South Carolina and see my mom's family. But in the 90s, we didn't have like TVs in the back of the car. We didn't have like, my parents controlled the radio. So my sister, people talk about watching the condensation on the window, like race down the window. Like that's for like 8 hours straight. You were stuck with your thoughts,
completely. Or you'd play I Spy.
Yeah, exactly.
This whole time.
Or smack your sibling. Just keep smacking your, I'm not touching.
Or, God forbid, actually had a conversation with each other.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I just remember once my parents bought me myself and my two sisters all sitting in the back of the car. And in those days, there were no safety belts or anything. And they said, they were like, oh, for goodness sake, entertain yourself. And they bought us a bag of cherries. So unbeknown to them, in the back of the car, we wound their windows down. And every time we went past a cyclist or a walking person, we threw the cherry stones at them. And then suddenly we get this motorbike coming alongside, waving my dad down. And he's like, do you know your children are throwing cherry pips at everyone? And I can always remember my dad, who was so sweet, pretending to be really shocked. And as soon as the motorbike went off, he just was burst into fits of laughter, because he said, well, we did say entertain yourself. So, yeah, we have fun in those days. Simple things pleased us. But I think, I see a lot of discussions on this with the energy vampires. It is a real thing. We're not trying to say that this isn't a real thing that can have a massive effect on you. But equally, the more that we can be open to recognizing traits in ourselves, what's attracting this, if you're someone that keeps getting these people coming back into your life, how are we all behaving, we can sort of shut it down a lot more, because it has become a bit rife now.
Absolutely. Yeah, you can cut that off when you realize what it is you're looking for in that person to fulfill yourself. You can snap it shut. Life is so much better when you've got people in your life that don't do that to you and don't expect to take up your time. I think that's hysterical, Catherine, about you and the cherry pits.
I know, exactly.
Oh, dear. That was the 80s and 90s. Like, that's just how, I remember my sister, right when caller ID came out, before it came out, she had a bunch of her friends. It was like our parents there were adults in the house too. I think there was like a dinner party. My sister was in her room with the kids, and they were prank calling people. And all of a sudden, our house line rings. My mom answers it, and the person had gotten caller ID, but it was right when it was new, so never had it. My sister got in so much trouble. But yeah, we had to be creative, and we had to fend for ourselves. And I think maybe if we go back to that a little bit, we won't have the need to take from other people, and so.
Really good point. Well, thanks so much for everyone who's joined us. Let us know in the comments, how's this affecting you? Are you recognizing it? Is it increasing as far as you know? What are you doing about it? What are your tips for dealing with it? So let us know. And if you're an energy vampire, what are you doing about it, and what's working for you? Because I'm sure we've all got most of these traits in us in just different degrees. So, and we will be back next time on Esoteric Atlanta. So all of Brice's links will be below. If you're not connected to her on YouTube and on Rumble and on TikTok, please do. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen. And if you feel inspired, please do share with your friends and family. This helps us spread the word, and also helps me encourage some exciting new guests to take part in this podcast. And above all, stay curious and stay free.